Picture this, it's 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in suburban Minneapolis, and Ronald Mallett can't sleep. He's 8 years old, lying in bed staring at the ceiling of his small bedroom. The house is quiet, except for the occasional creak of old wood settling. His father had died just 3 months earlier, a heart attack, sudden and brutal, taking away the one person who had shown him the infinite possibilities hidden in the pages of science fiction novels. In the darkness, young Ronald makes a promise to himself, one that will consume the next 6 decades of his life. He will build a machine to travel back in time, and he will save his father. Now you might think this is where I tell you it's just a beautiful, impossible dream, a child's fantasy born from grief. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, because Ronald Mallett didn't just dream about time travel, he became a theoretical physicist. He earned his doctorate, he became a professor, and in the basement of his ordinary suburban home, using equipment you could buy at a hardware store and electronics shop, he began building something that would make other physicists extremely uncomfortable. The device itself doesn't look like much. There are no swirling portals, no lightning bolts, no Hollywood special effects, just mirrors, lasers, and a peculiar arrangement of light beams forming a closed loop. But according to Mallett's calculations that have been published in peer-reviewed journals, that have been scrutinized by colleagues at the University of Connecticut, where he taught for decades, this simple arrangement might actually create a localized distortion in spacetime itself, a tiny wrinkle in the fabric of reality, where cause and effect could, theoretically, blur together. Before we dive deeper into what Mallett built in his basement, we need to understand something fundamental about time itself, because time isn't quite what you think it is. Right now, as you listen to these words, you probably imagine time as a river flowing in one direction, carrying all of us forward from past to future. This seems so obvious, so fundamental to our experience, that questioning it feels almost absurd. But physics, real, experimental verified physics, tells us something much stranger. Let me take you back to 1905, to Bern, Switzerland. Albert Einstein is 26 years old, working as a clerk in a patent office because he can't find an academic position. His days are spent reviewing applications for electromagnetic devices, his evenings consumed by thought experiments that will reshape our understanding of reality. He's been obsessing over a peculiar problem. What would you see if you could ride alongside a beam of light? This question, seemingly simple, leads Einstein to a radical conclusion. Time, he realizes, is not absolute. It's not a universal metronome ticking away the same for everyone everywhere. Instead, time is relative. It depends on how fast you're moving and how strong the gravitational field around you is. The proof comes in ways both subtle and dramatic. Take GPS satellites orbiting above us right now. These satellites contain atomic clocks, the most precise timekeepers humanity has ever built. And these clocks run faster than identical clocks on Earth's surface, about 38 microseconds faster each day. It's not a malfunction. It's because the satellites are moving faster and experiencing weaker gravity than we are down here. If engineers didn't account for this time dilation effect predicted by Einstein's relativity, your GPS navigation would drift off by several kilometers every single day. Or consider muons, those strange subatomic particles created when cosmic rays slam into our atmosphere. Muons have a half-life of about 2.2 microseconds. At the speeds they're traveling, they should decay long before reaching Earth's surface, but they don't. We detect them constantly at ground level. Why? Because from our perspective, time is moving slower for the muons due to their incredible velocity. Time dilation isn't theory, it's measured fact, happening all around you, every moment. But Einstein's revelation goes even further. In his general theory of relativity, published in 1915, he demonstrates that mass and energy actually curve space-time itself. Imagine space-time as a stretched rubber sheet. Place a bowling ball on it and the sheet curves around the ball. That curvature is what we experience as gravity. And here's where it gets truly strange. If mass can curve space, it can also curve time. Near massive objects, time literally runs slower. This has been verified experimentally with atomic clocks placed at different altitudes. Ronald Mallett understood all of this. He'd spent years studying Einstein's equations, learning the mathematical language that describes how spacetime bends and warps. And he noticed something that most physicists overlooked. In Einstein's equations, energy and mass are interchangeable. E=mc, but that famous equation tells us they're two forms of the same thing. If mass can curve spacetime, then energy should too, and light is pure energy. This realization came to him slowly, over years of thinking about his father, about loss, about the nature of time itself. Mallett would sit in his office at the University of Connecticut, equations covering his blackboard, and ask himself, could you use light to twist spacetime? Not just curve it, but actually twist it, create a rotation in the fabric of reality itself. The mathematics suggested it was possible. Take a beam of light and force it to travel in a circle, round and round. This circulating light would carry energy, and that energy would drag spacetime along with it. Like stirring honey with a spoon, creates a swirling pattern in the honey. Circulating light might create a swirling pattern in spacetime itself. And if you could make spacetime rotate, you might create what physicists call a closed timelike curve, a path through spacetime that loops back on itself, a path that could theoretically lead to the past. The idea sounds insane, but it's rooted in legitimate physics. Kurt Gödel, one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century and a close friend of Einstein, found exact solutions to Einstein's equations that allowed for closed time-like curves. These solutions described a rotating universe where time travel to the past was mathematically possible. Einstein was reportedly disturbed by Gödel's discovery, though he couldn't find any flaw in the mathematics. Other physicists found similar solutions. Frank Tipler showed that an infinitely long, rapidly rotating cylinder of matter could create closed time-like curves around it. Kip Thorne demonstrated that traversable wormholes, shortcuts through spacetime, could theoretically exist and might be used for time travel. But all these solutions required either impossible amounts of matter, exotic forms of energy that might not exist, or structures spanning cosmic distances. They were mathematical curiosities, not engineering blueprints. Mallett wanted something different, something you could actually build. His breakthrough came from thinking about angular momentum. When you spin something, you're not just making it rotate, you're creating a kind of twisting stress in the space around it. A rotating black hole, for instance, doesn't just curve spacetime around it, it drags spacetime along with its rotation in an effect called frame dragging. This has been measured by satellites orbiting Earth. Mallett realized that circulating light beams might create a miniature version of this effect. The device he began designing in the late 1990s, and eventually built components of in his home, uses ring lasers, lasers where the beam travels in a circle through a series of mirrors. By arranging multiple ring lasers in a specific configuration, Mallett calculated that he could create a region of twisted spacetime in the center. The twist would be minuscule, far too small to send a human through time, but it might be enough to affect fundamental particles, to create a measurable distortion that proved the principle was sound. Let me be clear about what Mallett was attempting. He wasn't trying to send himself back to 1955 to save his father. The mathematics showed that even if his device worked perfectly, it could only create closed time-like curves back to the moment the machine was first turned on. You can't use a time machine to travel to a time before the time machine existed. It would be like trying to call someone before telephones were invented. There's nowhere for the signal to go. But proving that you could create any closed time-like curve at all, even one spanning just microseconds, would be revolutionary. Mallett published his theoretical work in Physics Letters A in 2000. The paper was peer-reviewed, mathematically rigorous, and presented a testable hypothesis. Some physicists were intrigued, others were deeply skeptical, a few were openly hostile, suggesting that Mallett was wasting his time on impossible fantasy. The criticism centered on a few key points. First, the amount of energy required to create a measurable effect might be impossibly large. Second, there were questions about whether light truly could create frame dragging in the way Mallett proposed. Third, there was the question of causality violations, the famous paradoxes that emerge when you allow time travel. Some physicists, like Stephen Hawking, proposed a chronology protection conjecture, the idea that the laws of physics somehow conspire to prevent time travel to the past, even if it seems mathematically possible. Perhaps quantum effects would destroy any closed time-like curve before it could be used. But Mallett wasn't discouraged. He'd spent his entire life preparing for this. After his father's death, young Ronald had discovered H.G. Wells' The Time Machine in a library. The book gave him hope. If time travel was even conceivable, even as fiction, perhaps it could be real. He threw himself into education with single-minded intensity. His mother worked multiple jobs to support the family. Money was scarce. Mallett studied by streetlight when the electricity was shut off. He tutored other students to earn money for college applications. He was the first in his family to attend university, earning his Ph.D. in physics from Penn State in 1973. For years he didn't tell anyone about his real motivation. Time travel was considered fringe science, career suicide for a young physicist trying to establish himself, so Mallett did respectable work, publishing papers on general relativity and cosmology, earning tenure at the University of Connecticut, becoming a full professor. Only after achieving academic security did he begin openly working on time travel. The personal cost of this obsession was significant. Mallett's first marriage ended partly because of the time he devoted to his research. Colleagues sometimes dismissed him as a crank, despite his legitimate credentials, but he continued, driven by that promise he'd made to himself as a grieving 8-year-old. In his home basement, Mallett set up a small laboratory. The space was cramped, cluttered with optical equipment, mirrors, laser components. He wasn't trying to build a complete time machine here. That would require resources far beyond what one person could afford. Instead, he was building proof-of-concept experiments, testing specific predictions of his theory. One experiment involved seeing if circulating light could affect the behavior of neutrons passing through the twisted spacetime created by his ring lasers. But there's something profound about watching someone pursue an impossible dream with scientific rigor. Mallett wasn't just wishing for time travel, he was calculating, testing, refining. He was following the evidence wherever it led, accepting that failure was possible, even likely. This is what separates science from fantasy: the willingness to be proven wrong, the commitment to truth over comfort. Let me tell you about another aspect of time that makes Mallett's quest even more poignant. Time's arrow. The fact that we remember the past but not the future, that eggs break but don't spontaneously reassemble, isn't explained by relativity. Einstein's equations work equally well running forward or backward. The arrow of time emerges from thermodynamics, from entropy. Entropy is a measure of disorder, and it always increases in closed systems. This is why we perceive time as flowing in one direction. We're witnessing the universe's inexorable slide toward greater disorder. But here's the strange thing. Entropy's arrow isn't absolute. On small scales, entropy can decrease. Quantum systems can show time-reversed behavior. This means that microscopically, time travel might not violate any fundamental principles. If you could create a closed timelike curve, information or particles traveling through it wouldn't be doing anything physics forbids. The philosophical implications are staggering. If time travel is possible even in principle, then the future must already exist in some sense. This is called the block universe view, past, present, and future all equally real, all existing simultaneously with consciousness moving through them like a spotlight illuminating different moments. Mallett understood these implications. Would his device prove that his father's death existed in an eternal past that couldn't be changed? There's a melancholy beauty to this idea. Nothing is truly lost in a block universe. Every moment you've ever experienced still exists, just at a different temporal coordinate. Your childhood still exists. The people you've loved still exist in the moments you shared with them. The price of this comfort is accepting that those moments can't be changed. Let's talk about what would happen if Mallett's device actually worked. Suppose he managed to create a stable closed time-like curve, even one lasting just microseconds. You might be able to send information into your own past. Imagine a particle detector that triggers a signal when it detects a particle. The signal travels through the closed time-like curve and arrives before the particle was detected. This signal then causes the particle to be emitted, which leads to its detection, which sends the signal back, and so on. This creates what's called a causal loop, an event that causes itself. Which came first? Neither. Both. The loop has no beginning or end. It simply exists. Our intuition rebels against this. Causality seems fundamental to reality, but mathematically causal loops are consistent. They don't violate any laws of physics. They just require a different way of thinking about causation. Some solutions to temporal paradoxes involve the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Perhaps when you send information to your past, you're actually sending it to a parallel universe, a different branch of the quantum multiverse. No paradox, just an ever-branching tree of possibilities. Another solution involves consistency constraints. The universe only permits self-consistent causal loops. If you try to create a paradox, quantum mechanics steps in and prevents it. The year was 2006 when Mallett thought he was close to a breakthrough. He'd refined his designs, published multiple papers, and gained some support from colleagues. He applied for funding to build a larger, more sophisticated version of his device. The funding was denied. Time travel research, even theoretical research grounded in general relativity, was too controversial. Mallett was frustrated but not surprised. He scaled back his ambitions, continuing to work at home with limited resources. That same year he published a memoir titled Time Traveler, a scientist's personal mission to make time travel a reality. The book was part autobiography, part popular science explanation of his work. It received mixed reviews. Some readers were moved by the story of a boy's love for his father driving a lifetime of scientific pursuit. Others felt Mallett was overstating the feasibility of his ideas. Physicists debated whether his work represented legitimate fringe science or had crossed into pseudoscience. One persistent criticism came from Ken Olam and other physicists who argued that when you account for the full complexity of Einstein's equations, the spacetime curvature created by circulating light was far weaker than Mallett estimated. You'd need light intensities equivalent to all the energy in the visible universe concentrated in a tiny space to create a measurable closed timelike curve. Mallett responded with refined calculations, but no definitive resolution emerged. This is how science often works, not with dramatic eureka moments, but with slow debates over mathematical details. Meanwhile, other physicists were approaching time travel from different angles. Researchers were studying wormholes, shortcuts through spacetime that might connect different times. The math suggested keeping a wormhole open would require exotic matter with negative energy density. But then researchers discovered that quantum fields can have negative energy density under certain conditions. Maybe exotic matter wasn't impossible after all. This research wasn't driven by personal loss. It was driven by pure scientific desire to understand what the universe permits, and increasingly physicists were realizing that the universe might permit far stranger things than our intuition suggests. Black holes turned out to be real. We've now photographed them. Gravitational waves have been detected. The universe is accelerating. Reality keeps surprising us. Let me tell you about Kip Thorne, who thought about time travel from a different perspective. In the 1980s, Thorne was contacted by Carl Sagan, who was writing Contact and wanted to include scientifically plausible faster-than-light travel. Thorne discovered that wormholes, if stabilized, would allow time travel, move one end at high speed, while keeping the other stationary, and time dilation creates a time difference between the ends. Step through, and you've traveled to your past. Thorne published this in peer-reviewed journals. He was respectable, famous beyond reproach, and he was saying time travel might be possible. This gave cover to other physicists. The difference between Thorne's work and Mallett's was approach. Thorne explored theoretical possibilities without claiming he could build anything. Mallett was trying to actually construct a time machine, but both were driven by the same question: does the universe permit time travel? This brings us to 2019. Ronald Mallett is now in his 70s, retired from active teaching but still working on his theories. The basement laboratory is still there. His hair is white now, his movements slower. He's lived most of his life chasing this dream, and he knows he probably won't see it realized. But he's made peace with that. The journey has been its own reward. He's published dozens of papers, inspired countless students to think about time differently. He's kept his father's memory alive, not through denial, but through rigorous inquiry into the nature of reality. There's something profound about this acceptance. Mallett has spent 6 decades trying to save his father, yet he's also spent 6 decades slowly letting him go. The time machine became a way of processing grief, of transforming loss into something productive and meaningful. Whether or not it works is almost beside the point. In 2020, during the pandemic, Mallett gave an interview from his home. He talked about his calculations, about new experimental ideas, but he also talked about his father with a different kind of peace. I've come to understand, he said, that my father's death made me who I am. Without that loss, I wouldn't have become a physicist. In a strange way, losing him gave me my life's purpose. Would I trade that if I could? I honestly don't know anymore. This is the paradox at the heart of Mallett's quest. The very motivation for building a time machine would be eliminated if he succeeded. It's a causal loop not in physics but in meaning. The grief that drove him forward would disappear, erasing the journey that defined him. Let's step back and think about what this story tells us about science and grief. Science is often portrayed as cold, rational, unemotional, but real science is driven by deep human longings, the desire to understand, to control, to prevent suffering, to make sense of loss. Newton, Marie Curie, Rosalind Franklin, all were driven by personal emotional needs as much as intellectual curiosity. Mallett's work exists in that space, where rigorous mathematics meets profound emotional need. Does his device work? Could it work? The honest answer is, we don't know. The mathematics is sound, but mathematics doesn't always translate to reality. There might be practical limitations that make it impossible with any foreseeable technology. Or there might be a way forward we haven't discovered yet. What we do know is that Mallett's quest has advanced our understanding of what's theoretically possible. Even if he never builds a working time machine, his work has value. Think about what it means that we can even contemplate building a time machine. A century ago, this would have been pure fantasy. Now it's serious physics, debated in journals, analyzed with sophisticated mathematics. We live in an age where the impossible is merely extremely difficult, but there's also a cautionary element. Obsession carries costs. Mallett sacrificed relationships, faced ridicule, spent decades chasing something that might be fundamentally impossible. At what point does persistence become stubbornness? When does a dream become a delusion? There's no easy answer. We judge these things in hindsight, after the outcome is known. Mallett doesn't yet know which category he falls into. Let me tell you about one more thing Mallett discovered in his research, something that perhaps reconciled him more than anything else to his father's death. In general relativity, there's a concept called the light cone, a diagram showing all the events that could potentially influence a point in space-time, and all the events that point could influence. Here's the profound part. Once an event enters your past light cone, it influences you forever. Mallett's father died in 1955. That death has been influencing Ronald ever since. Every decision he made, every equation he wrote, all of it traced back to that moment. His father's death didn't end his father's influence. It transformed it, channeled it, gave it new expression through Ronald's life. In this sense, his father never really left. He's been present in every paper Ronald published, every class he taught, every student he inspired. The love between them transcended the mere presence or absence of his father's body. It became woven into the fabric of Ronald's choices, a pattern that will continue rippling forward, even after Ronald himself is gone. Maybe this is what we mean by eternal life, not the preservation of our physical forms, but the persistence of our influence, the patterns we create in other people's lives. Mallett has said he's made peace with never seeing his father again. The time machine, even if it worked, couldn't take him to a past before the machine existed, and he's realized he doesn't need a time machine to honor his father's memory. The work itself is the memorial. The quest is the tribute. We all do this in smaller ways. We make art to process grief. We build gardens to remember loved ones. We tell stories to keep memories alive. Mallett just happened to do it with laser physics and differential geometry. The impulse is the same: transform loss into something that lasts, something that matters, something that pushes the boundaries of what we thought possible. In 2024, now in his late 70s, Mallett gave a TEDx talk titled Chasing Time, a physicist's love letter to his father. It wasn't about equations or experimental details. It was about how personal tragedy can fuel discovery, about the thin line between obsession and dedication, about making peace with impossible dreams. The talk went viral, garnering millions of views. People responded not to the physics but to the story, a son's love for his father, a lifetime spent trying to fix the unfixable. Mallett realized his story had reached people in ways his scientific papers never could. The time machine had become a metaphor for our universal human desire to undo our regrets, to have more time with the people we love. But he was careful not to oversell his work. In interviews, he always emphasized the uncertainties, the possibility that his critics might be right. He didn't want to be remembered as a dreamer detached from reality. He wanted to be remembered as someone who asked hard questions with intellectual honesty. Recent advances in laser technology have been remarkable. Scientists have created laser pulses with peak powers exceeding a petawatt, more power than the entire world uses, concentrated in a femtosecond duration pulse. Could these be adapted to test Mallett's ideas? In principle, yes, but even with these impressive technologies, we're still orders of magnitude away from what his calculations suggest is needed. Technology improves exponentially, though. Maybe in another century the technology Mallett dreams of will be commonplace. Of course, by then Mallett will be gone. He won't see whether his ideas pan out, and there's something deeply sad about that. A man spending his life trying to conquer time, but ultimately subject to time's arrow like everyone else. Yet there's also something beautiful about it. Mallett's work will outlive him. His papers will remain in journals. His ideas will inspire future physicists. His story will be told. In that sense, he's already achieved a kind of immortality. Let me leave you with this thought. Mallett's quest teaches us that the boundaries between success and failure, between vision and obsession, between science and emotion, are far blurrier than we like to admit. His 6 decades of trying to build a time machine look like 6 decades of love made manifest. The specific outcome, whether the machine works, becomes less important than the dedication, the effort, the refusal to let his father's death be meaningless. Science advances through people like Ronald Mallett, people who ask uncomfortable questions, who pursue ideas others dismiss, who are driven by motivations deeper than career advancement or peer approval. Sometimes these people are vindicated, sometimes they're forgotten, but they all contribute to the slow, grinding process by which humanity expands its understanding of what's possible. Mallett doesn't know if he'll be remembered as a visionary or a dreamer, but he knows he gave his father's memory the greatest tribute he could imagine, a lifetime of rigorous thought about the nature of time itself. And in doing so, he's shown us something profound about the relationship between love and loss, between grief and discovery, between accepting what cannot be changed and refusing to accept that anything is truly impossible. That basement laboratory, with its mirrors and lasers and impossible dreams, is more than an attempt to build a time machine. It's a monument to what drives us forward as human beings, the desperate, beautiful, tragic hope that we might somehow transcend our limitations and hold on to what we love just a little bit longer.